The red sun never moved in the sky of Kepler 442c. Commander Sarah Chen had been staring at it for 3 days now, watching it hang like a bloody eye above the horizon. The planet was locked in place, one side always facing the star, the other trapped in eternal darkness. She and her team had set up camp right on the border between day and night, where the temperature was just right for humans to survive. "Commander, you need to see this," called Dr. Marcus Webb from behind a cluster of scanning equipment. His voice carried excitement mixed with something else. Fear, maybe. Sarah walked over to where Marcus stood with the rest of her xenoarchaeology team. They were all looking at a massive scanner display that showed what lay beneath the rocky ground. The image made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. "How big is it?" she asked. "At least 50 kilometers across," said Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the team's geological expert. "Maybe bigger. Our scanners can't see the edges." The structure buried under their feet was unlike anything in the databases. It looked part machine, part living creature. Curved walls twisted through the rock like the inside of some giant shell, strange chambers connected by tubes that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. "How old?" Sarah asked. Marcus checked his readings again. "The dating equipment says at least 2 million years. But that can't be right. Nothing this complex should still be intact after that long." "Unless it's not dead," whispered Dr. James Park, their technology specialist. He pointed at his energy scanner. "Look at these readings. There's definitely something happening down there. Power flowing through those tube things." Sarah studied the displays. In 30 years of exploring dead worlds, she had never seen anything like this. Most alien ruins they found were simple buildings or basic machinery. This looked like it had grown rather than been built. "We need to get closer," she decided. "James, can you find an entrance?" James ran his hands over a portable scanner. "There's a shaft about 200 meters that way. Looks like it goes straight down to the main structure." The team packed their gear and hiked across the rocky landscape. The ground here was strange. It looked like normal rock, but it felt soft under their boots, almost like walking on skin. They found the shaft exactly where James said it would be. It was perfectly round, about 10 meters across, and so deep their lights couldn't reach the bottom. "I'm going down first," Sarah announced. "Commander, we don't know if it's safe," Marcus protested. "That's why I'm going first," Sarah replied, checking her climbing gear. "If something happens to me, you get back to the ship and report what we found." The shaft walls were smooth as glass, but Sarah's equipment held firm as she rappelled down. Her headlamp beam danced across the walls, showing her something that made her stop halfway down. The walls weren't empty. Patterns covered every surface. Not carved or painted, but somehow part of the material itself. They looked like circuit boards mixed with blood vessels. As Sarah watched, she could swear she saw light moving through some of the thinner lines. "Commander, what do you see?" Marcus's voice crackled through her radio. "You won't believe me if I tell you," Sarah replied, continuing her descent. The shaft opened into a vast chamber. Sarah's light swept across curved walls that stretched away into darkness. The architecture was impossible to understand. Surfaces bent and twisted in ways that hurt to look at. There were no straight lines anywhere. But what caught Sarah's attention was the floor. It wasn't solid. Instead, a thick liquid covered everything, glowing with soft blue light. She could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Sarah touched down on a raised platform that seemed designed for someone her size. As soon as her boots made contact, everything changed. Light exploded through the chamber. Not harsh electric light, but something warm and alive. The walls began to pulse with rhythm like a heartbeat. The liquid on the floor started moving faster, swirling in patterns that almost looked like writing. "Commander, Commander, are you okay?" Marcus's voice was urgent through the radio. Sarah looked up. Far above, she could see her team's lights at the mouth of the shaft. "I'm fine, but I think I woke something up." The chamber continued to brighten. More platforms rose from the liquid floor, creating a path that led deeper into the structure. Sarah realized she was looking at some kind of invitation. She followed the path. Each step brought new wonders. The walls showed moving images of star systems she didn't recognize. Strange equations floated in the air, written in symbols that somehow felt familiar even though she had never seen them before. The path led to a central chamber where Sarah stopped and stared in amazement. A massive sphere hung in the center, covered in the same organic-looking technology as everything else. It pulsed with light that matched her heartbeat exactly. As Sarah watched, part of the sphere opened like a flower. Inside was a hollow space just the right size for a human body. This can't be a coincidence, she whispered to herself. She activated her radio. Marcus, I need the whole team down here. Bring everything. We're going to need to study this for months. What did you find, Commander? Sarah looked around the impossible chamber, watching light flow through walls like blood through veins. She thought about the platform that was exactly human-sized, the sphere that opened when she approached, the way everything seemed designed for someone like her. I think we found something that was waiting for us, she said. Over the next few hours, her team descended into the structure. Each person's arrival caused new sections to light up, new passages to open. The structure was definitely reacting to human presence in ways that seemed designed and purposeful. Dr. Park's equipment went crazy trying to measure the energy output. Commander, this thing is putting out more power than our entire ship. But the readings don't match any known technology. Dr. Tanaka found that the walls contained materials that shouldn't exist. It's like someone took regular matter and taught it to think, she reported. Dr. Webb made the most disturbing discovery. His biological scanners showed that parts of the structure were definitely alive, not like a plant or animal, but like something entirely new. It's learning from us, he told Sarah privately. Every time one of us touches something or goes somewhere new, the structure changes. It's studying us, Sarah nodded. She had felt it too. The sense of being watched, analyzed, understood in ways that went beyond normal observation. As night fell on the planet's day side, the team set up a temporary camp inside the structure. The walls provided perfect temperature and even seemed to generate breathable air. It was too convenient to be natural. Sarah sat on her sleeping bag updating her mission logs. Around her, the structure hummed with quiet activity. Lights flowed through the walls in complex patterns. Sometimes she thought she could almost understand what they meant. Her radio crackled with an incoming message from their ship in orbit. Commander Chen, we're receiving some unusual signals from your location. Also, there are ships approaching the system. Big ones. They'll be here in about 6 hours. Sarah frowned. Their mission was supposed to be secret. Do you recognize the ships? Negative, Commander. They're not human design. Looks like at least 3 different alien species. And Commander? They're all heading straight for your position. Sarah looked around the glowing chamber. Whatever they had found, word was already spreading. Other species knew about this place and were coming to investigate. She had a feeling that their discovery was about to become much more complicated. The alien ships arrived like angry gods descending from heaven. Sarah watched from the observation platform. They had built near the structure's main entrance, as 3 massive vessels settled into orbit around Kepler 442c. Each ship was the size of a small city and represented a different species from the Galactic Confederation. Commander, we're receiving transmission requests from all 3 ships, reported Lieutenant Torres from their communications station. They're demanding we cease all activities and evacuate immediately. Sarah had expected this. Humanity was still new to galactic politics, barely 50 years since first contact. Most alien species treated humans like dangerous children who couldn't be trusted with sharp objects. Put them through, Sarah ordered. The first transmission came from the crystal ship. The speaker appeared as a floating geometric shape made of blue light. This was High Coordinator Zathkar of the Zephyrian Empire. Their species was ancient, logical, and considered themselves the galaxy's natural leaders. Human Commander, Zathkar's voice rang like struck glass. You will evacuate this planet immediately. You have activated a catalyst engine. Your primitive understanding cannot comprehend the danger you have created. Before Sarah could respond, a second transmission came through. This one was from the energy-based ethereals, who appeared as shifting clouds of colored mist. Their representative called itself Prime Essence Forthak. The humans must be stopped, Forthak's voice whispered like wind through caves. Already the engine changes. Already it grows stronger. They do not understand what they have awakened. The third ship belonged to the Hegemony, a machine intelligence collective. Their representative was a cube-shaped robot with dozens of blinking lights. Probability of success with human involvement, 0.03%, the machine stated in a flat electronic voice. Historical analysis confirms. All species that activate catalyst engines face extinction within 50 standard years. Humans must withdraw for galactic safety. Sarah took a deep breath. She had dealt with condescending aliens before, but never 3 different species at once. This is Commander Sarah Chen of the human exploration vessel Horizon, she replied calmly. We're conducting authorized archaeological research under Confederation law. If you have concerns about our work, you can file a formal complaint with the Confederation Council. Zathkar's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. You do not understand. This is not a ruin. This is a weapon created by the architects, a species that vanished 2 million years ago. There are 7 catalyst engines scattered across the galaxy. Each one that has been activated has led to the complete destruction of the species that found it. The Veltar Empire activated one 300,000 years ago, added Vorthak. They were masters of biotechnology, more advanced than your species will ever be. The engine killed every last one of them. The machine representative projected a holographic display showing dead worlds. The Kethamori Collective found another engine 50,000 years ago. Their machine cities spanned 12 star systems. All destroyed. The Jadakari found the third engine 20,000 years ago. Their psychic powers could reshape matter itself. All dead. Sarah felt cold fear creeping up her spine, but she kept her voice steady. If these engines are so dangerous, why haven't you destroyed them? Because they cannot be destroyed, Zathkar replied. The architects built them from materials that exist partially outside normal spacetime. Physical attacks pass through them. Energy weapons have no effect. The only way to stop them is to never activate them in the first place. But you have activated one, Vorthak added. Already we can detect changes in local spacetime. The engine is beginning its primary function. Sarah looked back at the structure behind her. Even from this distance, she could see it glowing brighter than before. New sections had grown overnight, pushing up through the rock like strange flowers. What exactly do these engines do? She asked. The 3 aliens exchanged communications in rapid bursts of light and energy. Finally, Zathkar spoke for all of them. They test species for compatibility with the architect's final project. The tests begin simple but become increasingly complex and dangerous. Species that fail are eliminated. Those that pass face a final trial that no one has ever survived. The architects left records, the machine added. Fragments only. They spoke of a great threat coming from beyond our dimension. The engines were meant to find a species capable of stopping this threat. But every species tested has failed, including yours, Vorthak whispered. Your primitive human minds cannot comprehend mathematics that transcend physical reality. You will fail like all the others. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. She was tired of being talked down to by species that thought humans were too stupid to tie their own shoes. Maybe we will fail, she said, but that's our choice to make. We're not leaving. The reaction was immediate. All 3 alien ships began powering up weapon systems. You endanger the entire galaxy with your ignorance, Zathkar declared. If you will not leave voluntarily, we will remove you by force. Commander! Lieutenant Torres called from the communication station. The structure is doing something. Sarah turned to look. The catalyst engine was changing rapidly. New towers were growing from the ground, reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. The glow was becoming so bright it was hard to look at directly. But strangest of all, Sarah could feel something in her mind. A presence, ancient and vast, but somehow gentle. It felt curious about her thoughts, interested in the way humans approach problems. The engine is responding to your species specifically, the machine intelligence observed. This has never happened before. Previous activations were purely mechanical. Dr. Webb's voice came through Sarah's radio from inside the structure. Commander, you need to get down here. The engine is creating new chambers, and they're designed specifically for humans. The doorways are the right height. The controls are positioned for human hands. Even the air mixture is perfect for human lungs. Sarah stared at the growing structure. It's adapting to us. Impossible, Zathkar declared. The engines are fixed constructs. They cannot change their basic programming. But as they watched, the structure continued to grow and reshape itself. Platforms extended from the main body, creating docking bays that were clearly designed for human shuttlecraft. Walkways formed at exactly the right height for human steps. Commander, Dr. Park reported over the radio. I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the structure. But the weird thing is, it's not random. The energy patterns look almost like neural networks. Like a brain thinking really hard about something. Sarah made her decision. She activated her communicator to address all 3 alien ships. You can point your weapons at us all you want, she said. But we're not leaving. This engine chose to activate when humans found it. Maybe that means something. Maybe we're supposed to be here. Your arrogance will doom you all, Vorthak hissed. The probability calculations are clear, the machine stated. Human failure rate approaches certainty. Zathkar's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been resignation. We cannot force you to leave without starting a war with your species. But we will remain in orbit. When the engine begins its testing phase, we will document your failure for galactic records. The 3 ships pulled back to a safe distance but remained in the system. Sarah knew they would be watching every move, waiting for humanity to prove their predictions correct. She headed back into the structure. The team had been working around the clock to understand what they had found, but each answer led to 10 more questions. Commander, Dr. Tanaka called as Sarah entered the main chamber. We figured out how old this thing really is. The dating was wrong before because the materials exist partially outside normal time. This engine has been here for exactly 2.3 million years. That matches when the architects disappeared, Sarah noted. There's more, Dr. Webb added excitedly. We've been analyzing the biological components. They're not just alive, they're intelligent. The entire structure is one massive organism that thinks in ways we can barely understand. Sarah walked to the central sphere, which had remained open since her first visit. The hollow space inside still looked exactly human-sized. Has anyone tried getting inside yet? She asked. Her team exchanged nervous looks. We thought we should wait for you, Dr. Park said. The aliens made it sound pretty dangerous. Sarah studied the sphere. The organic walls pulsed gently, and she could see complex patterns of light flowing through them. It didn't feel threatening. If anything, it felt welcoming. The aliens have been wrong about a lot of things, she said. Maybe they're wrong about this too. She stepped forward toward the sphere. As she approached, the light patterns intensified, almost like the structure was excited to see her. Commander, wait, Marcus called. Let us at least monitor your vital signs. Sarah paused while her team set up medical scanners. When they were ready, she stepped into the sphere. The moment she made contact with the organic walls, her world exploded into visions. Sarah found herself standing in a place that wasn't quite real. The chamber around her looked the same, but everything felt different. The air shimmered with possibilities, and she could sense vast intelligence watching her every thought. Welcome, a voice said without words, speaking directly into her mind. You are the first to enter willingly. Others came with fear or greed. You come with curiosity. The voice belonged to the catalyst engine itself. Sarah realized she was communicating with something that had waited 2 million years for the right species to find it. What do you want from us? Sarah asked. To understand how you think, the engine replied. Your species approaches problems differently than others. Where they see obstacles, you see puzzles. Where they calculate probabilities, you imagine possibilities. The space around Sarah shifted, becoming a vast testing chamber. I must evaluate your species' capabilities. The test will challenge not just intelligence, but creativity, empathy, and wisdom. Are you ready? Sarah thought about her team, about the alien ships waiting in orbit, about the responsibility weighing on her shoulders. If I fail these tests, what happens to humanity? The same thing that happened to the others, the engine said sadly. But I sense something different in your species, something that gives me hope. The first test began simply enough. Sarah found herself in a room with a locked door and no visible key. The walls showed mathematical equations that would take years to solve using traditional methods. Sarah studied the problem for a few minutes, then did something that surprised even herself. Instead of trying to solve the equations, she knocked on the door. Hello? She called. Is anyone there? The door immediately unlocked and swung open. Interesting, the engine noted. Others attempted to solve the mathematics. You tried communication. The second test was more complex. Sarah stood in a maze with walls that shifted every few seconds. At the center was a glowing orb that she needed to reach. Every other species had tried to memorize the maze pattern or calculate the optimal path. Sarah sat down in the entrance and closed her eyes. She listened to the sound of the shifting walls, feeling for patterns in the rhythm. After a few minutes, she began to hum along with the maze's movement. When she opened her eyes and started walking, the walls parted before her like they were dancing to her tune. You treat challenges as partners rather than enemies, the engine observed. The tests continued, each one more difficult than the last. Sarah faced puzzles that required her to sacrifice personal gain for the benefit of imaginary others. She solved problems by thinking in ways that defied logic, but somehow reached correct solutions. In one test, she had to choose between saving a single person she could see or 1,000 people she couldn't. Most species chose the 1,000. following mathematical logic. Sarah refused to choose at all. The premise is flawed, she declared. If I can see one person who needs help, I help them. If I find 1,000 who need help, I help them too. You don't solve problems by deciding who deserves to live. The engine fell silent for long moments. Others tried to optimize outcomes. You rejected the fundamental assumption that optimization was necessary. Hours passed in the testing space, though Sarah wasn't sure how much time was passing in the real world. Each test revealed something new about human thinking patterns. Humans didn't just solve problems, they redefined them. They found solutions that hadn't existed until humans imagined them into being. Finally, Sarah found herself in a vast chamber facing the most complex test yet. The space contained what looked like a three-dimensional puzzle made of pure energy. Millions of interconnected pieces moved in patterns that hurt to look at directly. This is the test that destroyed the Kethmori Collective, the engine explained. They were machines like your computers, but infinitely more advanced. They could calculate 1 trillion possibilities per second. The puzzle broke their collective consciousness. Sarah studied the energy construct. It was beautiful in its complexity, but she could sense the trap within it. The puzzle was designed to overwhelm logical thinking by providing too many variables to process. Instead of trying to solve it piece by piece, Sarah stepped back and looked at the whole thing. She let her mind relax, not thinking about the puzzle, but simply experiencing it. It's not a puzzle, she said suddenly. It's art. The moment she spoke, the energy construct shifted. Instead of millions of moving pieces, Sarah could see it as a single flowing sculpture. The solution wasn't about moving pieces to the right positions. It was about understanding what the sculpture was trying to express. The architects were trying to show me something, Sarah continued, walking around the construct. Not a mathematical proof, but an emotion. They were afraid. The energy sculpture pulsed brighter. Sarah could feel the engine's excitement. They built these engines not because they had a logical plan, Sarah continued, but because they were desperate. They were facing something that couldn't be defeated with normal thinking, so they hoped to find someone who could think impossibly. The sculpture dissolved, revealing a new chamber. This one contained holographic records of the architects themselves. Sarah gasped when she saw them. They looked almost human, but with silver skin and eyes like deep pools of starlight. They were like us, Sarah whispered. Similar evolutionary path, the engine confirmed. They thought with both logic and intuition, but they had become too dependent on their technology. When the Devourers came from beyond dimensions, the architects' logical solutions failed. The holograms showed the final days of the architect civilization. Creatures of living darkness poured through tears in space itself, consuming matter and energy alike. The architects' most powerful weapons passed through them harmlessly. The Devourers exist partially outside normal physics, the engine explained. They can only be affected by forces that transcend conventional reality. The architects built us to find a species capable of such transcendence. And you think humans qualify? Sarah asked. You just solved a puzzle by refusing to treat it as a puzzle. You found truth by ignoring logic. Your species regularly performs miracles through sheer stubborn refusal to accept impossibility. Sarah felt a chill as the implications hit her. The Devourers are coming back, aren't they? They never left, the engine replied sadly. They have been feeding in the spaces between galaxies, growing stronger. Soon they will return to finish consuming our universe. The other 6 engines are already beginning to activate. The testing chamber dissolved, returning Sarah to the real world. She found herself back in the sphere, surrounded by her worried team. According to their instruments, she had been unconscious for only 10 minutes. Commander, are you okay? Dr. Webb asked urgently. Your brain activity went off the charts. Sarah stepped out of the sphere, her mind reeling with everything she had learned. Around them, the structure was changing again. New chambers were forming, and she could see displays showing the locations of the other 6 catalyst engines across the galaxy. We need to contact Earth immediately, she said, and we need to talk to those alien ships. Commander, what happened in there? Marcus asked. Sarah looked at her team, these brave humans who had followed her into the unknown. We passed the first round of tests, but that was just the beginning. She activated her communicator to hail the alien ships in orbit. When their representatives appeared on screen, she could see surprise in their expressions. You survived the initial testing phase, Zathkar observed. This has never happened before. The engine has accepted your species for advanced evaluation, Forthak added. We detect massive energy signatures from the other catalyst engines. They are all activating simultaneously. Sarah took a deep breath. I need to tell you what the engine showed me. The architects didn't disappear. They were killed by something called the Devourers, and they're coming back. The alien representatives exchanged rapid communications. Finally, the machine intelligence spoke. Our historical records contain references to the Devourers, entities that consume matter and energy from beyond our dimensional boundaries. But these are considered myths. They're not myths, Sarah said firmly. The engine has recordings. The Devourers killed the architects 2 million years ago, and now they're returning to finish the job. She could see fear in the aliens' expressions. Even the machine intelligence seemed disturbed. If this is true, Zathkar said slowly, then the catalyst engines are not weapons of destruction. They are selection tools, looking for a species capable of fighting something that exists outside normal physics, Sarah confirmed. Something that can only be stopped by thinking that transcends conventional reality. And the engine believes humans possess this capability? Vorthak asked. Sarah nodded. But we're just getting started. The real tests are still coming. Around them, the structure continued to grow and change. Sarah could feel the engine's consciousness expanding, connecting with its counterparts across the galaxy. Whatever was coming next, it would be bigger than anything humanity had ever faced. But for the first time since finding the engine, Sarah felt genuinely hopeful. Humans had always been good at doing the impossible when they had to. Maybe that would be enough. 3 days after Sarah's first contact with the catalyst engine, everything changed. The structure had grown into a massive complex that covered 50 square kilometers of the planet's surface. New sections appeared hourly, each one more impossible than the last. Buildings that folded through dimensions, walkways that led to rooms bigger than the spaces that contained them, and gardens where flowers bloomed with liquid starlight. But the most dramatic change was in space around the planet. The 7 catalyst engines across the galaxy had formed a network, creating energy bridges that connected star systems thousands of light years apart. Ships from dozens of species arrived daily, all drawn by signals they couldn't understand but couldn't ignore. Sarah stood in the engine's new command center, a chamber that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. She had learned not to think too hard about the architecture. Human brains weren't built to process impossible geometry, but they were surprisingly good at accepting it. The archaeological data banks are finally opening, Dr. Webb reported from a control station that looked grown rather than built. We're getting direct records from the architect civilization, the main display filled with images from 2 million years ago. Sarah watched the final days of a species that had dominated the galaxy for 10 million years. The architects had been masters of science and art, creators of wonders that made current galactic civilization look primitive. But they had one fatal weakness. They thought logically. Show me how the Devourers first appeared, Sarah requested. The display shifted to show space itself beginning to tear. Dark shapes poured through the holes in reality, creatures that looked like living shadows with too many dimensions. They moved through normal space like sharks through water, consuming everything they touched. The architect's first response was logical. The engine's voice spoke directly into Sarah's mind. They tried to study the Devourers, understand their nature, develop weapons based on scientific principles. The images showed massive architect fleets engaging the invaders. Energy weapons that could destroy stars passed harmlessly through the shadow creatures. Gravitational weapons that could collapse space-time had no effect. Even reality warping. Technology failed to touch beings that existed, partially outside reality itself. Every logical solution failed, Sarah observed. The architects spent 300 years developing increasingly complex responses, the engine continued. They built weapons that operated in higher dimensions, created forces that transcended known physics, even attempted to seal themselves off from normal space-time. Nothing worked. Sarah watched the final battle. The last architect fleets made a desperate stand around their homeworld. They threw everything they had at the Devourers. Matter converters that could turn planets into pure energy, weapons that rewrote the fundamental constants of physics, reality engines that could create new universes, all useless against an enemy that fed on the very concept of existence itself. They built the catalyst engines in their final days, the engine explained. a desperate hope that some future species might succeed where logic had failed. Dr. Park looked up from his scanner readings. "Commander, I'm detecting massive distortions in local spacetime. The other engines are doing something." Sarah felt it too. A pulling sensation, like reality itself was being stretched thin. Through the chamber's impossible windows, she could see stars moving out of position. "The network is activating fully," the engine announced. "The final test begins now." The command center filled with holographic displays showing all 7 engine locations across the galaxy. Each one was surrounded by fleets from different species. The Zephyrians' crystal ships hung around one engine, their geometric forms pulsing with analytical energy. The Ethereal's cloud vessels surrounded another, their misty forms shifting through probability calculations. But only the engine on Kepler 442c showed the chaotic, improvised additions that marked human involvement. "What exactly is the final test?" Sarah asked. Instead of answering directly, the engine showed her. Reality around the planet began to shift and twist. The familiar laws of physics became suggestions rather than rules. Space and time flowed like water. Matter and energy danced together in patterns that had no names. And through it all, Sarah could sense them approaching. The Devourers, drawn by the engine network's activation like predators sensing wounded prey. "The test is simple," the engine explained. "Stop the Devourers from consuming our universe. But the solution must transcend all known physics and logic." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "How are we supposed to fight something that exists outside reality?" "The same way your species does everything else," the engine replied. "By refusing to accept that it can't be done." Around the command center, her team was already working. Marcus was analyzing the Devourer records, looking for patterns. Yuki was studying the dimensional distortions, trying to understand how the creatures moved between realities. James was examining the engine network, mapping its capabilities. But Sarah could see they were thinking like scientists, approaching the problem logically. That was exactly what had failed before. "Stop," she called to her team. "We're thinking about this wrong." They looked at her with confusion. "Commander, we need to gather data," Marcus protested. "Understand the enemy's capabilities." "The architects had millions of years to gather data," Sarah replied. "They understood the Devourers better than we ever could. Knowledge didn't save them." She walked to the center of the command chamber, where a holographic display showed the approaching shadow creatures. They moved through space like living nightmares, their forms shifting through dimensions that had no geometry. "They're not really creatures at all," Sarah said suddenly. "They're more like a natural force, like entropy or gravity." The engine pulsed with interest. "Explain." Sarah studied the display, letting her intuition guide her thinking instead of logic. The architects kept trying to fight them like they were an enemy army. But you can't fight entropy with weapons. You can't negotiate with gravity. You can't reason with a natural law. "So what do?" Dr. Park asked. Sarah smiled. "You change the rules." She turned to address the engine directly. "You said the Devourers feed on existence itself. But what if we gave them something else to feed on? Such as?" Sarah's mind was racing now, connecting ideas that had no business being connected. "Stories." The command center fell silent. Her team stared at her like she had lost her mind. "Think about it," Sarah continued, excitement building in her voice. "Humans are the only species that regularly creates things that don't exist. We tell stories about fictional people in imaginary places. We dream about impossible worlds. We believe in things that aren't real and make them real through belief." The engine's voice carried a note of wonder. "You propose to feed the Devourers fictional existence instead of real existence." "Not just fictional," Sarah corrected. "Infinite. If they want to consume reality, we give them an endless supply of realities that never run out because we keep making them up." She turned to her team. "Every human story ever told, every dream ever dreamed, every impossible thing we've ever imagined. That's what we feed them." Marcus looked skeptical. "Commander, that's not how physics works. You can't substitute imagination for reality." "Says who?" Sarah challenged. "The same physics that says the Devourers can't exist? The same logic that failed to stop them for 2 million years?" The engine began to pulse faster, its consciousness expanding across the network. "The other species cannot comprehend this approach. They require logical frameworks." Sarah felt the weight of the moment. "Then it's up to us." She walked to the central control interface, a device that responded to thought rather than touch. As she placed her hands on its organic surface, she felt her consciousness expand across the engine network. Through 7 different engines on 7 different worlds, she could sense the other species working frantically. The crystal beings were calculating probability matrices. The energy clouds were modeling dimensional intersections. The machine minds were processing tactical algorithms. All of them were thinking logically. All of them were failing. "I need to connect with every human in the galaxy," Sarah announced. Not just the scientists and soldiers, everyone. Children telling bedtime stories. Artists painting impossible pictures. Writers creating worlds that never were. The engine hesitated. Such a connection has never been attempted. The psychic feedback could destroy human consciousness across multiple star systems. Sarah thought about the approaching devourers, about the civilizations they had already consumed, about the universe that would end if humanity failed where everyone else had. "Sometimes you have to risk everything to save anything," she said. The engine network began to shift its configuration. Instead of connecting to other artificial intelligences, it reached out to organic minds across the galaxy. Every human consciousness became part of a vast network, dedicated to the impossible task of imagining the devourers away. Sarah felt millions of minds joining hers, children on Earth dreaming about dragons and fairy tales, colonists on distant worlds telling stories around campfires, artists and writers and dreamers all adding their impossible visions to a growing symphony of fictional realities. Through the engine network, she could sense the devourers' approach. They moved through space like living hunger, consuming star systems as they came. Their forms shifted through dimensions that shouldn't exist, feeding on the very concept of existence itself. But as the human imagination network grew stronger, something unprecedented began to happen. The devourers slowed their approach. They seemed confused, as if sensing food that they couldn't quite reach. "It's working," Dr. Webb reported, his voice filled with amazement. "The devourers are trying to feed on the fictional realities, but they can't fully consume them because they're not technically real." Sarah smiled as she felt the network's power growing. Millions of human minds working together, not to solve a problem logically, but to imagine a solution that didn't need to make sense. The real test was just beginning. The network of human consciousness spanned the galaxy like a web of living dreams. Sarah stood at its center, her mind connected to millions of others, feeling the weight of every story ever told and every impossible thing ever imagined. Through the Catalyst engine network, she could see the devourers approaching through dimensions that had no names. But something was wrong. "Commander, the fictional realities are having an effect, but it's not enough," Dr. Park reported urgently. "The devourers are adapting. They're learning to consume imaginary existence just like real existence." Sarah could feel it happening. The shadow creatures were like cosmic parasites, evolving to feed on whatever was offered to them. Stories that had confused them at first were now being devoured as eagerly as planets and stars. "They're too hungry," she whispered. 2 million years of feeding in empty space between galaxies. They'll consume anything we give them and still want more." Through the engine network, she could sense panic spreading among the other species. The crystal beings were calculating the exact time until universal consumption. The energy clouds were modeling the final collapse of reality itself. The machine minds were processing the mathematical certainty of total failure. Even the humans connected to her network were beginning to feel despair. How could imagination stand against hunger that had devoured entire dimensions? But then Sarah heard something that changed everything. A small voice in the network belonging to a 5-year-old girl on Earth named Emma. "Why don't we just make friends with them?" Emma asked. The question was so simple it stopped Sarah's racing thoughts completely. Make friends with cosmic entities of pure hunger. The idea was absurd. It was illogical. It was impossible. It was perfectly human. "Emma," Sarah said, speaking directly through the network to the little girl, "tell me more about making friends with them." "Well," Emma replied in the serious tone that only children could use when explaining obvious things to confused adults. "They're hungry, right? So maybe they're just sad and lonely. When I'm sad and lonely, I want someone to play with me and tell me stories and make me feel better." Sarah felt something shift in her understanding. The other species saw the devourers as a force of nature, like a hurricane or a black hole, but Emma saw them as beings who might be suffering. "What if we don't try to fight them or feed them?" Sarah announced to the network. "What if we try to heal them?" The response was immediate pushback from the logical minds in the network. Military officers insisted that the creatures were too dangerous. Scientists argued that entities of pure consumption couldn't be reasoned with. But the children understood immediately. And artists. And anyone who had ever looked at something broken and imagined it whole. Sarah felt the network's purpose shifting. Instead of creating fictional realities to distract the devourers, human consciousness began to imagine something else entirely. They began to dream of the creatures not as they were, but as they could be. What if the devourers hadn't always been consuming shadows? What if they had once been something else, something that creation and growth instead of endless hunger? The vision spread through the network like wildfire. Children drew pictures of the shadow creatures as they might have been before they became lost in empty space. Writers told stories of cosmic beings who had forgotten their own names and purposes. Artists painted images of entities learning to create instead of destroy. And slowly, impossibly, the devourers began to change. "Commander, this is unprecedented," the catalyst engine reported, its voice filled with something that might have been wonder. "The creatures are responding to the reimagining. Their dimensional signatures are shifting." Through the network's expanded senses, Sarah could see the transformation beginning. The shadow creatures that had approached like living nightmares were slowing, their forms becoming less chaotic. The endless hunger that had driven them for 2 million years was being replaced by something else. Curiosity. "They remember," Sarah breathed. "They're starting to remember what they used to be." The visions flowing through the human network were becoming reality. The devourers had once been creators, beings of pure imagination that had helped birth new universes. But eons of isolation and empty space had twisted them, turned their creative impulse into consuming hunger. Now, touched by millions of human minds that refused to accept that anything was beyond redemption, they were remembering their original nature. But the transformation wasn't complete. The creatures were fighting against the change, clinging to the hunger that had defined them for so long. And Sarah could feel the strain on the human network. Connecting millions of minds across the galaxy was burning out the engine systems. "We're losing coherence," Dr. Webb reported. "The network is too large. Human brains weren't designed for this kind of connection." Sarah felt it too. The beautiful symphony of connected consciousness was beginning to fracture. Individual minds were dropping out of the network as the psychic strain became too much to bear. But then she felt something new joining the network. The alien species that had spent days calculating probabilities and modeling failures were adding their own consciousness to the mix. "If humans can imagine the impossible," High Coordinator Zathkar announced, "then we can help them make it real." The crystal beings added their computational power to the network, not to calculate solutions but to stabilize the connections between human minds. The energy clouds used their dimensional abilities to expand the network's reach. The machine minds provided processing power to handle the vast complexity of reimagining cosmic entities. For the first time in galactic history, multiple species were working together not just practically, but imaginatively. The effect on the devourers was immediate and dramatic. The shadow creatures began to shine with their own light, their chaotic forms solidifying into beings of impossible beauty. The hunger that had driven them for eons transformed into a desire to create, to nurture, to help reality grow instead of consuming it. "It's working," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face as she felt the transformation completing itself. They're remembering who they really are. The beings that had once been devourers spread throughout the galaxy, but instead of consuming, they began to create. Dead worlds bloomed with new life. Broken star systems reformed into patterns of stunning beauty. The tears in space-time that had allowed them entry began to heal, sealed by the creative force they now embodied. But the most amazing transformation was in the species of the galaxy themselves. The crisis had forced them to work together in ways that transcended their individual limitations. The network that had been created to save the universe had become something permanent, a connection between all conscious beings that allowed them to share not just information, but dreams and hopes and impossible visions. "The architects would be proud," the catalyst engine observed as Sarah finally disconnected from the network. "They built us to find a species capable of transcending logic and physics. But they never imagined that species would teach everyone else to transcend their limitations too." Sarah looked around the command center. Her team was exhausted but smiling. Through the impossible windows, she could see the former devourers dancing between stars. their creative energy already beginning to reshape the galaxy into something more beautiful than it had ever been. "So what happens now?" Dr. Park asked. Sarah thought about the question. The immediate crisis was over, but the galaxy had been fundamentally changed. Species that had spent millennia in isolation were now connected by bonds of shared imagination. The rigid hierarchies of the Galactic Confederation were being replaced by something more fluid and creative. "Now we learn," Sarah said. "The engines were built to test us, but I think we've graduated from tests. Now we get to explore what's possible when you have an entire galaxy full of beings who refuse to accept impossibility." She walked to the chamber's central display, which now showed not the locations of weapons or threats, but the growing network of connections between worlds. Each point of light represented not just a planet or species, but a node of consciousness contributing to the galaxy's expanding imagination. The architects spent millions of years trying to solve the devourer problem through logic and technology, Sarah continued. We solved it in a few days by refusing to see it as a problem at all. Maybe that's what humans bring to the galaxy, not better logic or stronger technology, but the stubborn refusal to accept that anything is truly impossible. Outside, the stars themselves seemed to pulse with new possibilities. The crisis that had threatened to end everything had instead become the beginning of something unprecedented, a galaxy where imagination was as real as physics, where species worked together to dream impossible dreams into existence, where even the most terrifying cosmic forces could be transformed through the simple act of seeing them differently. And at the center of it all, 7 catalyst engines that had waited 2 million years for someone to teach them that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't energy or matter, or even time itself. It was hope. The galaxy had learned to dream, and in dreaming it had discovered that reality was far more flexible than anyone had ever imagined. The age of logical limitations was ending. The age of impossible possibilities had begun. Sarah smiled as she felt the network's gentle presence in the back of her mind, connecting her not just to her own species, but to every conscious being in the galaxy. They were all part of something larger now, something that the architects had hoped for but never quite managed to achieve. They were a community of dreamers, and together, there was nothing they couldn't imagine into existence.